Welcome back to our Quest AI series where we discuss getting started and expanding on AI projects. With me, once again, I've got Johann, our chief data scientist. He's here to answer some recent questions we have. Hey, Johann.
Hey, Jace. How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. I can't believe we're at the end of February. So this year is going really fast.
Yes, and I am ready for spring.
Yes. So we have a couple of good questions this week, and I'm starting to see more people reaching out, asking really good questions. The only challenge is we have to pick. We can't answer them all. So if we didn't get to your question, I apologize. We will just keep coming, with those questions. So first one, I think you have that, right?
Yes, I do. So this is actually a question that we received from Bill, who's one of our partners. It was an email from Carlos. It says, "Hey, Bill, thanks for the email. You mentioned that you help companies with all kinds of AI implementations, such as implementing generative AI, etc., not just custom AI projects. I need to get some notes together for an internal proposal on why we need outside help. If you have a white paper or something to share, I'd appreciate it."
All right. So that's a common question we get, and especially around, I just noticed the last couple of weeks, I would say since the beginning of the year, Microsoft's been rolling out Copilot. And, there's a big push for them to, I think, monetize on their investment with OpenAI. So Copilot is going to be like, if you're probably too young to remember Clippy, but years back, there was this little office assistant called Clippy.
Oh, and yeah, I know.
You remember that?
I remember. Yes, I remember.
So Clippy didn't go over very well with most people. But I think Microsoft is trying to push out Copilot to be like a really helpful assistant. Now, the challenge is if you're a company and you're looking at implementing software, you're going to go to a vendor like Microsoft. They might refer you to a partner. And if you think about what their goal is to ultimately sell a license to you, right? And the partner is going to be somebody that wants to support that and help you implement it and sell services or even, get some licensing through Microsoft. Now, that's business, right? Everybody needs to make a buck. So they're going to look at that as kind of the lens through which they make recommendations. So very often, and that's what I'm kind of referring to for this year so far, we've been pulled in almost like a third party to come and help and validate, first of all, the implementation of what is needed, but also the strategy. Because if you think about, if you're a Google shop, right, and you're using Google Workspace, Google Docs, Sheets, all those things, how much of a value is there in Copilot, for instance? Is there a competitor? And actually there is. Google's got a competitor to that, but they're not really good at advertising it yet. So when we typically consult, I would say it is at the strategy level of how to not just implement it, but also how do you measure the success of it? And this is different from typical software, right? So if you think about, if we were to implement Office products, which everybody should by now know, Microsoft Office, Outlook, all those things, if we implemented that in a company, you can kind of see, okay, we don't need to hire personal assistants anymore to type up somebody's email, right? A person can type their own email. You don't have to have that personal assistant to go and schedule your calendar because you have Outlook with whatever calendar functionality built in. So there's a lot of things that you can see the changes very easily. But how do you see changes in productivity unless you've got a baseline? So what we do is we typically would go in and we'll give them the strategy, work with them to kind of implement the strategy. And part of that would be, how do we establish the baseline measures and how do we measure that against when we introduce new technology that includes AI? I've said this many times, we don't always look at the AI technology to be perfect. We're looking at how much does it help people. So for example, if we're cutting out of an 8-hour day, we're cutting out maybe an hour or 2 hours of somebody having to go do something by automating it, great, that's a saving. Then nobody cares how well the model performs and all those things. So the measure of success is always going to be something where we're improving some business process or automation or whatever. The other reason why I think it's important to look at it from a strategy level is just, you look at Copilot, that is one tool, right? It is something that's going to give you some kind of intelligence to work with. But what if you wanted to automate something and you're not a Microsoft shop? One of our clients actually came to us and asked about Power Automate and how can they use Power Automate with Copilot. And that's a great use case. Another client, they basically asked the same question, but they're not a Microsoft shop. So where do they go? What's the equivalent technology of Power Automate, for instance, but not in Microsoft world? So that's why you need a strategy so that you can pick the best tool and not necessarily the tool that's being sold to you. And I think what we'll probably do with Bill's client is give them, we don't have a white paper, but we do have practices around this when we engage with clients, what we kind of go through to form that strategy and how to pull in different vendors for what they're good at. And I think that's the key, is to use the right tool as well as the right vendor for the right use case.
Okay, great.
All right.
All right, let's see what else we have here. All right, so another question. Oh, yep, go ahead.
No, I think this is mine, right?
I think so. Yes, this is for you. This is from Charlie from LinkedIn. So he asked, hey, man, there's too much noise around AI, but I want to keep it up to date. Any resources or recommendations? Actually, I feel like this pertains to me as well. So where would I go for resources or recommendations if I'm interested in this as well?
That's a good question. And I think that's the challenge that we all see, right? More information does not make us more intelligent, unfortunately. So the internet is great, but it does feel, even for myself, and I have to keep up with a lot of different areas of AI and machine learning, it does feel overwhelming. So there's a book that I read years ago called The Information Diet, and it basically gives you guidelines of how to look at sources of data and how to consume that data. So if you think about the type of data, first of all, and this applies, I'll get specific, but just as a general rule, the way that I look at it is when I'm researching something, I'm looking for sources of data that is not McDonald's. I'm looking for the prime USD, beef grade that's bio-friendly. I don't eat meat, so I'm messing this up, I know. But I'm looking for the healthiest kind of information that I can find. So those kind of sources are typically going to be people that I follow, that I know. Like, for instance, Jan LeCun from Meta. There's a lot of things that he's done. And why I follow him is because he's very much into open sourcing AI and making it available for everybody. He's got controversial views that not everybody agrees with. So a counter to him would be Gary Marcus, which is somebody that I also follow and is, I think, on the academia side, but I might be wrong. And it's good to kind of see two opposing views of AI and what are they interested in? What are their views of it, right? So I'm very selective in where I go for my sources. There's very few people that I would, just follow just because I'm interested in, because I don't have the time for junk food. The same way I don't have time for junk information. So a lot of the noise are really just, it boils down to the same discipline that you apply to eating, you can apply to information gathering. If you're doom scrolling, right, on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever, to me, that's a waste of time. So you're not going to pick up information. You're going to pick up a lot of garbage, a lot of noise. So having intent, just like when you eat, you kind of seek out what's healthy. It's the same. Find good sources of information that you can seek out that is authoritative. And they might be wrong. Yeah, that's why I like having the opposing sides of it to kind of see where we're going with this. The other, to get a little bit more specific, the other source that I use a lot is just, I like reading papers. And I would not recommend it for anybody that is at a management level to go and read a bunch of papers. That's not, the sense or the best use of their time specifically. But what you get is from, a lot of the research is just where are things going? So you get a sense of where, like, for instance, with the current, video and text and audio and all these things that's happening with generative AI, where is it going to go? Because if you're an executive or you're a thought leader or whatever in your organization, you need to be able to think ahead a couple of steps, right? So you want to know where it's going. So where do you go for that information? That is actually where LinkedIn's pretty good, but you have to follow the right people. So what I do is I go and I look at the kind of roles, and there's a couple of people that I follow at Intel. There's a couple of people at NVIDIA, Meta. So I look at these big companies and I kind of see what kind of papers are they working on, because if they publish a paper today, in 3 months to 6 months, that's probably going to enter the business side of things. So that is kind of how I do it. So it is, I think, for the general population, it's difficult to, where do I find good sources? But instead of me making up rules for people, all I want to say is think of it as just like food. If you're eating healthy, it's something you do that's mindful. You have to basically think about it. It's not just going to happen. And it's the same when you consume. I think it applies to social media. You kind of have to be intentional in what you're reading and seeking. So that I would say that was from Charlie. Yeah, that would be my advice.
Okay, I like that, and advice for me too. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And I think we have one last question. This is also from LinkedIn. This is from Lauren. This was actually a question posted on LinkedIn and forwarded to me by her, just to kind of get our perspective on this. So she asked, how can you control cloud AI costs while promoting innovation?
So first of all, you have to pick the right cloud environment. So what I mean with that is there's actually many other sources of cloud processing outside of just the big three, which is AWS and Azure and Google. We actually met last week. We met with somebody from Grok. Grok is a new startup that came to the scene in the last 2 months or so. I started hearing about them. Not to be confused with Grok, the AI on Twitter or on X. Grok, what they're doing is they're trying to optimize the speed of large language models. And, if you use that service, you're going to cut your cost, but you're also going to cut the amount of time that you spend running that model. So I think we're entering that time period where you have to be selective in the kind of cloud provider that you pick for the right tool. One of my friends uses a cloud service for his databases. And I asked him about it, about security and stuff like that. And he said, dude, it's safe, it's secure, and it's really cost effective. I'm like, all right, can't argue with that. So just going to one vendor, like if you're all locked in with AWS or all locked in with Azure or whatever, you kind of, you need to sit back, just like with your AI strategy. You have to have a strategy around your cloud, How do I optimize different processes for the cloud? You can typically start in the cloud. And I think that would be the second point is, when we look at AI projects, we like to start small. And I'll talk about the process in a minute. But when you do something small on a small scale, I wouldn't worry too much about, finding the best, most optimized cloud provider. But I would start with something like one of the big three, just to make it easy to prove out the concept. But going to the next level, you have to start looking at, okay, where will this run long term? And it's the same part of the strategy where you look at your data. Where will I get this data long term? So I think picking the right cloud service or provider is important. Second thing is you have to monitor. You have to be able to know what's the cost predictably going to be every month. I might have told this story before, but we did a estimate last year for a client. And they wanted to know if they were to retrain a language model every month, how much would it cost them? So we engaged with AWS just so we could make sure we get the cost right. We're not missing out anything. And it ended up to being, I think, about $20,000 for each training session. Now, for this company, not a big deal, but, for a lot of companies, $20,000 just to train a model, that's not the infrastructure. That's not the hosting or anything. That might be a lot of money. So, it's important to understand when you implement the technology, how much is it going to cost you and be able to do projections. But you can't do that if you don't track it and if you don't monitor it. The third thing is the process I was talking about. So let's dig into that a little bit. So Quest, we kind of have a process from the initiation of a project all the way into production, right? Mm-hmm. And we call it the CAP step process. And I'll put the acronym on the screen here. So it is CAPSTEP, CAPSTEP. It's cross-industry, agile, production, starting up, which is basically where we go with the MVP or the initial rollout, transition, evaluation, and performance, right? So if you go through all those steps, the reason we kind of have that CAPSTEP process is so that we have small incremental ways of testing the AI models to make sure that it's the right tool to solve the problem. And second, learning how does this scale? I mean, AI, I don't want to say it's not predictable, but there's some kind of, unpredictable portions that you kind of need to test in small steps before you just let it loose. And I'm not just talking about the prediction of the model. I'm talking about the performance. When you have a bunch of people using it, you don't really know how people are always going to use it. I can imagine that the OpenAI and those companies have huge bills, when it comes to processing. So that's why having a good process in place, and that CAP-step process rolls up into how we look at strategy for AI projects is important. So recap. If you're looking at, just managing costs while still innovating with AI, first thing is pick the right cloud service provider. Second is track and monitor. Third is going to be have a good process. And then I would say fourth, small experiments where you basically step it, through each phase.
Okay. Now, I just want to quickly have something I wanted to ask you. In the CAP-step process, you mentioned agile. What do you mean by that?
That's a good question. So agile is a project methodology process that typically you would run into with software development. And I think that's where you probably run into it most, when clients are asking you for, a software developer with experience in agile.
I see
you probably
it a lot.
heard that
a
lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So with our AI projects, we typically, if you think about our process, it sits on top of agile. So you still have sprints every week or every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, depends how long your sprint is going to be. But there's some differences, right? And this is where the cross-industry process, it's called CRISP-DM, comes in. There are 6 phases, and the 6 phases, let me put it up on the screen here. First one is going to be your business understanding. Second is going to be your data understanding. And part of our process at Quest is to have a checkpoint. After we looked at the data and we looked at the business requirements, we want to know, can we actually finish this project given the time and the resources and the data? The third is going to be just data transformation. A lot of that is the data preparation, data transformation. So that's the third step. The fourth step is the fun one. That's where everybody gets excited when they start doing actual modeling and they're able to create models, evaluate models, and then pick a winning model. Fifth one is going to be validation. And the validation step is where we take what we basically see the model do with the data, the performance, and we look back at the business and data understanding. So that first 2 steps is where we set up the baseline and we say, okay, let's all agree. If this project is going to be successful, we need to have a model that can perform at 80% precision. That translates to saving 2 hours a day. All right. I'm just making that up. But we all agree that's the goal, right? When we get to step 5, we validate and we say, okay, now that we have the model running, is it actually able to save 2 hours a day, or is it only saving that 1.5 hours, or is it saving 3 hours a day? So we want to be able to measure before we go to production. So is it guaranteed? It's not, but it is a process to kind of help you check, and move slowly, and always have checkpoints where you can stop and make a decision. And then step 6 is going to be, now we go to production or not. Now, those 6 steps are unique to some degree, but it is how we run AI projects, right? That sits on top of Agile, where Agile is where you have scrums and you have, all these ceremonies where you do backlog grooming and capacity planning and all those things. That's normal. That's not going to change. We're still going to do that for AI projects. We just have a process on top of that for very specifically machine learning and AI.
All right. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
I think that might be all.
For this week?
That's it for this week. Yes.
Okay.
All right, guys. Well, make sure you get your questions into us before next week, and we will see you next Friday.